In this experiment, neurons also isolated from snail brain tissue were grown in culture for several days, after which very low concentrations of mercury were added to the culture medium for 20 minutes. Over the next 30 minutes, the neurite membrane underwent rapid degeneration, leaving behind the denuded neurofibrils seen here. In contrast, other heavy metals added at this same concentration, such as aluminum, lead, cadmium, and manganese, did not produce this effect. Shown here is a neurite growth cone stained specifically for tubulin and actin, before and after mercury exposure. Note that the mercury has caused disintegration of tubulin microtubule structure. These new findings reveal important visual evidence as to how mercury causes neurodegeneration. More importantly, this study provides the first direct evidence that low-level mercury exposure is indeed a precipitating factor that can initiate this neurodegenerative process within the brain.
Mercury-containing vaccines may help, not harm kids, according to 2 new studies in the journal Pediatrics. There have been widespread concerns that mercury-based preservatives in vaccines might impair the neurological development of children. These new studies suggest that the opposite, that the preservatives may actually be associated with improved behavior and mental performance.
So, mercury literally annihilates brain cells like no other heavy metal in microscopic amounts, much lower than what they're injecting into kids. But if you read off a teleprompter, it's magic. It's absolute magic. And all these brain damaged kids and the lowering IQs in the West and the skyrocketing cancer, it's all just a big accident. But that Merck scientist said, we just gave it to the Russians to kill their ass. It's so much fun. Trust the government. They love you now, and you know they do. I shouldn't get upset, should I? I shouldn't be up here at night fighting the globalists. I shouldn't be obsessed with this. I shouldn't have had those nightmares last night knowing they're killing us on purpose. I should just shave my head for all the kids dying around me of cancer. I've got a bunch of people in the office with girlfriends and young people dying of cancer. I should just shave my head and go for a jog and feel real good and give some money to the killers instead of actually finding out they're doing it to us on purpose. Because you don't want to actually save anybody. You just want to feel good. So I apologize. I really do. Well, I don't know what to say right now. We're back. It's InfoWars Nightly News, another extended transmission because we're desperate to warn you. We know this information, and my God, how could we not try to warn you? Hopefully you'll take that same spirit of enlightenment and spread it on to others, because night is falling fast on free societies worldwide. We've got to defeat this tyranny before it's too late. Before we go to Peter Dale Scott, I got a few more stories here. Maryland Motor Vehicles System has come out with a trial in-car system that bosses you around when you go over the speed limit and later will report you to police. And they're just beta testing a system that I've seen the federal government transportation department talk about, where they're going to have these systems in your cars that track everything you do. They already admit OnStar sells all your data to the feds and insurance companies. They've actually told their minions that that's happening. Here's a letter we were sent where one of our listeners has basically begun to opt into being part of the system. That's all up at Infowars.com. And finally, before we go to Peter Dale Scott, Ahmadinejad, who's an engineer, the leader of Iran, spoke at the UN yesterday, and he said that as an engineer, there's no way the towers fell from jet fuel. Well, what about Building 7? It wasn't even hit by an aircraft. And, of course, the media now seizes on this and says, well, if you don't believe the official story, you're with the evil, Iranians. I don't know. I'm with physics. I'm with common sense. And I also know that the BBC reported Building 7 had fallen before it fell with the official story. And I have video of police saying, get back, the government's going to blow up Building 7. So the media likes to focus on the 2 towers, which are clearly controlled demolitions as well. But Building 7, which was hundreds and hundreds of yards away, wasn't hit by an aircraft. So here's a clip of Ahmadinejad.
I'm an engineer by trade, and I understand that those mega towers could not have imploded the way they did by two jetliners flying into them. The first time I looked at those horrific pictures, I understood. This is a systematic collapse of those towers. This I can say with certainty because there must have been some explosive material that was set off in sequence.
Last year, when the need for a fact-finding team to undertake a thorough investigation concerning the hidden elements involved in September 11th incident was brought up, an idea which is also endorsed by all independent governments and nations as well as by the majority in the United States. My country and myself came under pressures and threats by the government of the United States.
Yeah, but again, we're not supposed to look at this because supposedly our enemy, the media, told us Ahmadinejad says that looks suspicious. And of course, we've got even other clips of it where you can see the bomb blast going off. We're supposed to just completely buy into the official story. Of course, the owner says he blew it up in a controlled demolition. Oh, there's some video of it right before it. Oh, look, blast points. Oh, and the exact points where a controlled demolition charges will be placed. There's now 1,500 plus architects and engineers, some of them huge skyscraper builders, famous architects going public here in the United States, but just ignore them because Ahmadinejad said it was suspicious. Again, don't let your lying eyes get in the way. Believe the federal government. Hell, you just heard me earlier talk about federal studies through the Journal of Pediatrics that said that mercury was good for kids' brains. Ignore that electron microscope showing it being the most deadly heavy metal in brain neurons. Just ignore the video of Building 7. Ignore that, because I bet if Ahmadinejad looked at that electron microscope, he'd say mercury was bad for those neurons. Well, that's it. I bet Ahmadinejad thinks mercury's bad for babies. He's an extremist. Okay, we're going to go to Peter Dale Scott. I want to conclude this special transmission with an interview with Peter Dale Scott, an amazing historian, professor, researcher, the author of scores of books. He really wrote the original definitive works exposing CIA drug trafficking, of course, in Vietnam and then in Latin America. He's an expert on Iran, Contra, and more. And he's got two new books out. American War Machine is his newest, and then, of course, The Road to 9/11. But I wanted to get him on today because recently we have seen a group of filmmakers who were able to interview Richard Clarke and others being threatened by the CIA if they release the names of CIA agents they discovered were basically involved in covering up the identity of the hijackers pre-9/11. This is pretty powerful stuff, and joining us is Peter Dale Scott to discuss it. Peter, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, and I'm glad to be on the show again. You know, it's a matter of two names who are not big names in the whole story. The big names in the story, Richard Blee and Tom Wilshire, we've known for some time now, and particularly the name of Richard Blee was discovered in a book by, this is a very important book here, Kevin Fenton. He's a Briton living in Prague, Czechoslovakia, and he's written a whole book about how the CIA withheld information from the FBI. The two names that were sensitive to the CIA are part of the story, but not a big part of the story. Richard Blee is absolutely central to it, because he was high up in the CIA's Bin Laden unit, and he was also obviously a hawk. He had been pushing for a program to get the CIA on the ground with the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan for months before 9/11 happened. So that it's very striking that, on the one hand, he's withholding information that could have stopped 9/11 from happening. That's a general consensus from everybody, that this was vital information. If the FBI had had it, they could have brought in some, maybe the majority of the hijackers. Then on the other hand, he's acting as if he wanted 9/11 to go forward, and at the same time, he's preparing a plan for what to do when there's a casus belli, and it's essentially what they did do. They went in on behalf of the Northern Alliance which was quite controversial because everyone knew that the Northern Alliance was an army supporting itself by drug trafficking.
Speaking of drug trafficking, now we see Geraldo Rivera on Fox. We see ABC News. We see BBC. I mean, I've played these clips here on air where they just admit now, okay, the troops help grow the opium and we help ship it out and we give them fertilizer, and then we worry about it once it gets to America or once it gets to Europe. And we've seen in the last 10 years, it go from 9% of world production, according to our own Justice Department, to 92% of world opium, then produced into heroin coming out of Afghanistan. And now, back when you were exposing it in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and Gary Webb was exposing it, they would still somewhat try to deny it. Now they just say, yeah, we grow the opium. It's no big deal. And I was telling you off air, now the El Paso Times, Chicago Tribune have confirmed with the federal documents that indeed most of the big Mexican drug cartels are allowed to ship drugs in, and it's only the cowboys that are shut down, and that our own government shipping guns into Mexico to knock out the drug dealers' competition, and it just looks exactly like Iran-Contra all over again.
Well, for 50 years, the CIA has wanted to exercise its clout in parts of the world where there are no U.S. Army troops, and so they rely on drug proxy armies. And they started this initially in Southeast Asia, the Golden Triangle, back around 1950. And this was written about by Al McCoy in his book, The Politics of Heroin. But what Al didn't really convey is the extent to which CIA support for these armies built up the trade, so that the Golden Triangle went from less than 40 tons a year. It was very minor in the world markets before the war. And then by the height of the Vietnam War, it was somewhere between 600 and 1,200 tons. And then when that shut down, almost immediately you get the Golden Crescent starting up, and lo and behold, the CIA is there too. And again, it's the CIA support for the drug trafficking mujahideen. They weren't all drug traffickers by any means, but most of the CIA support went to the mujahideen who were the drug traffickers. And we see this explosive increase from maybe 100, 200 tons back in 1980 to a high of 8,200 tons in 2006. It's down a little bit, but most of what's being grown in Afghanistan right now, it gets blamed on the Taliban and the U.S. press, but only about 12% of it is Taliban drugs. By far, the bulk of it is in the corrupt system that's headed by Hamid Karzai in Kabul.